Car setups are super complicated when you're starting out with sim racing. All the different parameters constantly affecting each other. So you could ask yourself this: should I change the wheel rate? Should I change ride height? Should I change brake wing settings? But it depends on this yes and that. And then people say depends on tire pressure, camber values, you name it. And because of that, you get overwhelmed. How awesome would it be if you can get like a very simple 4-step system for your car setup builds in your particular simulator? A step-by-step system that you constantly can refer back to whenever you run into certain trouble with your car setup. I've been creating a lot of setups for a lot of simulators. When I started out with Forza 7 years ago on the Xbox, I took already an obsessive interest into car setups. Now, Forza wasn't really a sim, but it just learned me the basics. Then when I got into real simulators like the normal Assetto Corsa, I did a little bit of iRacing, and currently with ACC, I've built a lot of them. And I'm even selling them on my Patreon store now, and I get a lot of positive feedback, and I already sold more than 450 of them. So I can talk about how ride height is going to get rid of some understeer or oversteer, but I'd rather have you watch and look at this model, because this model will explain the understeer and the oversteer which you are facing. So what I want you to imagine is a box on the car, and this box represents force. Now, you set the highest wing setting, so there's gonna be some additional pressure on the back of the car whenever you go on high speed corners or downforce situations overall. Now, this box is kind of visualized underneath the car, on the floor of the car, because the floor also produces some downforce. Now, if you want to figure out where this box needs to be positioned, you need to start with the ride height. And the ride height is going to be, in this model, the outside box, meaning this will be the baseline. So if we look at this picture of this awesome looking BMW, we can see we have 60 millimeters ride height on the back and 50 on the front, making it have 10 millimeters of rake. Now, what I would do is to figure out if this baseline is okay. How can we know we have the proper ride height to start out with? So I believe if you have the transition from going, braking, releasing the brake, and then that dead middle zone when you're not braking or when you're not accelerating, if you have a good balance in the car, so meaning you have a good, like you don't have understeer or oversteer in that situation, I believe that is the ideal ride height for your car. So I'm gonna provide you with an example in Assetto Corsa Competizione, but I would dare to say that this is the system that I would use for any simulator if I wanted to try something else, like the different simulators that are coming on the market at some point. But it's just gonna use this to explain it. So this first step, the max wing setup, this is basically Arno's preset for ACC, but also note, take a safe preset in the game or an aggressive preset. Now, aggressive presets might be might be needing fixing the aggressiveness. In this Arno's preset, it's more about creating aggressiveness. So just use these values. I don't really like. I'm not gonna go into all of this stuff. Just use these ones. You can use this for every car in ACC, but like use an aggressive or other preset. Pause the video if you want to watch these values. So in the example that we're going to see here, these are the ride heights that I'm using. And to find balance, to find like a little bit of aggressiveness and something how to push the car in mid corner, we want to have like a nice rotating car whenever we're off the throttle and off the brakes, like dead center, because then the box will be in the neutral position. So in this particular situation, we're gonna look at like the setup that is, I don't know, it's preset, and you can see in the balloons from the element overlay that I'm basically understeering everywhere. Whenever I'm on throttle, not when I'm braking, it's still kind of okay when I'm trail braking, but you can see here I'm trail braking, and whenever I don't use throttle or braking, and when I'm idle on the throttle, we'll have this massive understeer in the car. So it is basically everywhere. In the example that I showed you in that like small clip we were driving and the setup, this is a little bit of the situation. So what that means is the box is placed too much backwards. We have too much pressure on the back of the car, or we not having enough pressure on the front of the car. So in that situation, I just want to drop the front ride height and higher the back. And this creates this force box to be more placed in front. Now, there's something to say about tire temperatures, and there's something to say about a lot of different other values of the car in particular simulators, but I just want to imagine this whenever you're off throttle or like the transition from braking into throttle, you should have found the sweet spot at some point, and then you can stop screwing around with the ride heights. Because whenever you're putting, let's say you say, on throttle I still have, like, the car will not turn when I go on throttle, and you start increasing more and more ride height, you also get a car that's too aggressive whenever you're braking. So in the example we saw in the model and in the driving, we had a lot of understeer when we were off throttle and not braking. So that means the outside box is just positioned backwards too much. And I would just want to look at the step 2 derake, changing up the ride heights. And that was going to be 50 and 75. I did a couple of laps, tried out a little bit, tried again, and I found this to be ideal. Now there's a little bit of a side note about ride heights, and that's why I like Spa really as a benchmark track, because Aero Rouge and Radion, you really need to take a lot of curb, and that's really a situation where the curb is all like a balloon-ish, and if you drive over it, this is the part of the bottoming out. If you're too low, you're bottoming out and the floor hits the car and you lose contact with your road surface, with the tires. If this happens, you've pushed the ride height too far and you should bring it up again. Also with a full tank, but that's a different story. We're not gonna go into that right now. So I found out this was working optimally. Let's look at that small clip again of the same section to understand how the car now behaves differently. So you can see now that whenever I take this section and release throttle, I get lots of rotation. Compared to that first clip, I could not have the rotation here. So the front is biting more. And even though we're not driving 200 kilometers, this still has influence on our car behavior. So you can still see the little bit of the understeer when on throttle. This also has to do with differential and other different settings, but to keep it simple, we are ready for step 3. Step 3 is going to be the dynamic rake of the car. How much of this force box can travel forward and backwards while braking and accelerating. This is going to be vital, especially when you're coming out of corners and you feel the understeer or oversteer, or you're braking into the corner and you're gonna feel the oversteer or understeer. This is where it all gets even more juicy than it was already getting. So let's talk a little bit more about the model. When we're accelerating, the force box goes backwards. So if we have a lot of ranges on the back, let's say we have 25 millimeters of rake. We didn't have any travel on the front, like 0, and we have 25 millimeters on the back. That means we got all the rake is gone. We have 0 rake in high speed or accelerating situations, which can make the car very understeery all of a sudden. So we have a lot of balance when we're off throttle and let's say not braking, but as soon as we on throttle, we have massive understeer. This is what the dynamic rake is. The dynamic rake is gone, basically. When we're going faster and faster, the rake is also disappearing because of the pressure of the airflow of the car, the rear wing, the floor, the car pushes down, and that also means that the force box is going to move backwards with lots of ranges on the back. Now, if we have long ranges on the front, and I'm talking spring travel, yeah, how much it can go, right? I'm also going to go into the stiffness of it, which is also super interesting. But first, I need to cover these ranges. So whenever we have a lot of ranges on the front, that means the car will pitch even more under braking, so we get the force box even more on front of the car. Now, front engine cars might be wanting this, but it's all about this balance while braking. If you just don't feel when you're braking or releasing throttle, that's also braking, and you don't feel the car is pointing into the corner, but you do have a good balance overall, you could increase or consider the bump stop ranges, travel, suspension travel to increase to get this force box more in front of the car. Whenever you look at a setup screen in every sim, I don't care which one, if you see ridiculous amounts of travel ranges like maximum sliders, just know that this force box is very dynamic. So it can be like, if it's super long ranges, it can be very oversteering while braking, and it can be very understeering on throttle. So know that. And if it's very short, it's gonna be very stable. That's what I also did with my level setups. The beginner setups are kind of very stable and have short ranges, which make the car super beginner friendly as well. So I'm not saying that long ranges are not good or bad, or they're good or bad. It doesn't really matter, but just know more ranges make it more difficult to drive. So to explain this even further, you can see how much like I can get into that apex, but now when I'm on throttle, I still get some sort of an understeer. And whenever I'm on this corner here, I really have the balance, but then I go on throttle and I have understeer. Over here as well, I try this corner, you really need to do full throttle. I invalidate the lap, I believe, and that's just making me have the understeer. So I have a balance when I'm braking, but whenever I go on throttle and the force box moves like kind of backwards or gets bigger over here as well, I just don't have the front grip in the higher speed situations. So that will put us in the dynamic rake. So whenever I'm going faster, I don't want dynamic rake moving backwards. So I don't want this blue box to go to the back whenever I get into faster situations or on throttle behavior. So what I basically did is decrease those ranges. So this makes the box smaller on the back end, meaning we don't get this force, the dynamic force, aero force, whatever, backwards that much. So it stops at some point. Again, you need to do a few laps. You're gonna test this out. I even found after a few races, like, I need that extra click. It can be that precise after a few races. So also note that you're not going for perfectionism, but whenever you have a corner where you really want to have full throttle and you want to have the back end have the rotation, then dropping these ranges a little bit can really help you out. I'm going to show. So it was 20 and 9. And then the second step, like the third step we are in right now, is like 15 and 13. So it's pointing more whenever we're braking, and it's also like moving backwards less, creating more dynamic rake under fast situations and throttle situations. So to clarify even more, we look at this box, we create it, we still have this ride heights, but we decrease the bump stop ranges, so the force box is not allowed to go backward that much, and under high speed situations it is allowed to move forward a bit more. So this can be sort of the baseline, but as we increase the speed or go on throttle, this force box does have the tendency to be more in front of the outside box, so it kind of moves forward when we go faster. So creating a frontward balance into this box model. I can even make some names out of it. And by the way, like, please hit that like button if you like this kind of content, because I have so much implementations for this box. I mean, we're also going to talk about wheel rates and how important they are in this model, but we can also put a complete mechanical grip section, anti-roll bar settings, toe values. I mean, people, we're just getting started. So please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to know more about this, because I am not finished, mate, with this model. So let's talk a little bit about the dynamic rake and the bump stop ranges we changed up. The first corner went super sweet, and this is a little bit of a corner that is such a high speed, and it's also a great test for bottoming out. And I just want to show you that the current ranges give me a lot of like desired result. I can hit a rouge full throttle, and I'm super happy with the high speed behavior of the car. So great, setup is solved, setup is fixed. Not really. So here we're braking. I have the nice rotation here, but I still, when I'm in a little bit of a slower corners, I still have to wait with the throttle. You can see that when, like, if you go back to the video, you can see I'm jumping and jumping with the throttle because I still have a little bit of that understeer, but I don't really feel confident with ranges below 15 or 10. Maybe I can drop them a little bit, but you want to keep some sort of a dynamic rake and movement in your setup, and that's the fourth step we need to get into. The fourth step will be the wheel rates, and the wheel rates are super important for a million reasons. But before we get into that, I just want to explain wheel rates, spring stiffness from an aerodynamic standpoint, because if you can understand that, then later you can understand other parts of this as well. Maybe we'll do that in a future video. I really need to know that in the comments if we want to expand and build on this model. Also, a little bit of another side note, please visualize this model when you're driving. Whenever you feel like, okay, I'm understeering a lot, the box is too much on the back, I need to increase the ride height or I need to decrease bump stop ranges. They go hand in hand. So I will put in a newsletter the changes you need to make to change this box forward and backwards. So subscribe to my newsletter or Patreon. I will put it in a Patreon as well. Have a look. Wheel rates, people. Wheel rates are great. Stiffer wheel rates in different situations. What does that mean? So what I'm explaining here is we have the force box, we have stiffer wheel rates on the front, and it's not like the stiffest or the weakest, it's just stiffer. It's just for explanation. I don't know what the perfect wheel rates for your setup are, but hear me out. This kind of setup with stiffer wheel rates on the front and softer wheel rates on the back, meaning whenever we encounter fast situations, the car, if everything would be the same, the car and the ranges would be the same. Let's say we have 25 millimeters of rake, the bump stop ranges are equal. We have the car dropping down on higher speeds, pulling it to the surface of the road, and then the rake will still be the same. If we have equal ranges, bump stop ranges on every wheel, and we have a stiffer front wheel rates, this means in, let's say, a slower situation like 150 kilometers, the rake will change more to the back, so the car will be flatter, and then when we go faster, the front springs will also start to compress when the rear springs are already on the bump stop ranges. So the higher spring rates, wheel rates, can change the dynamic rake under different speed situations. I hope it makes sense, but I will go through the slides, so stick with me. Let's say you had stiffer springs in the front, and now you are braking in a little bit of a slower corner situation. This means the front of the force box will not be allowed to move forward so much. Not as much as it was like lower spring or wheel rates. So in a way this makes trail braking more forgiving, and in the braking zone you will get like a more forgiving car. This can be really superficial if you're like struggling in a super fast corner and you need to brake and steer, and you have the car murdering you every time because you have too much of this force box pushing being like in front of the car. A stiffer wheel rate is the solution. It can really help with oversteer on entry and braking. The upside of this is it doesn't change the rest of the behavior. So if you have a good balance with the bump stop range and ride heights, these springs can really help you in the braking situation. So stiffer wheel rates on the front can get rid of oversteer in this situation. And I hope you can see now that we're not talking about oversteer, understeer, oh, just lower wheel rates. Now you know why you don't get the oversteer, because the box is not moving forward so much. And this is the reason why you want to run a little bit stiffer front end if you are more a beginner or you just want a bit of a safer setup. But you will have the same balance when you go in a fast corner. So in Eau Rouge, we're not getting into trouble because we're going so fast, even the stiff springs will compress. So we still have the proper balance in fast corners, but we will be a little bit more understeery mid-corner in some situations. Now, in this particular build, I don't want this, but maybe you have a situation where you want this. And I've seen people going off in oversteer braking situations, so maybe some of you will have a benefit from this. Again, when we go fast, higher speeds, the force will go backwards in this situation. I found this to be quite useful with the Ferrari 296 in ACC, but if I would have a car that is pretty good balance, but I have a lot of oversteer in fast corner situations, this is absolutely the way, like the route I would take. What if it was the other way around? And this is what we need in the Lexus example in this setup build, the fourth step. When I go a bit slower and I'm on throttle, I need to wait to put the throttle down because I don't get rotation. But I do have the proper balance in the fast corners. That I want to keep. But I need to have some sort of additional rotation when I'm on throttle. So I increase the wheel rates on the back to get rotation in slower and mid-speed corners. So I increase those rates. And what this does now, the force box is allowed to go backwards, but not that easily. And in high speeds, it will just suck up all of this square area, but the red part you can see here represents these stiffer wheel rates. Step 4, the wheel rates. And there's just a few clicks, and that can make all the difference. So what we did in this step, we just we had these values, and although the ranges are set, yeah, these are the ones they are gonna travel to. The wheel rates. Now, I just increased, decreased these ones and increased those ones, and that was basically it. We still have the ranges the same, but they're acting on different speed situations from an aerodynamic standpoint. Let's look at a small part of the lap to explain what happened and how it's so fun to drive all of a sudden. So, the new wheel rates give me this awesome stuff. So I can have this entry, and now I can go on throttle and have the rotation. You can, I don't hope you can see how it's rotating here as well. Still a little bit of forcing the understeer. It's playful, it's rotating, and especially this corner, I can just hit the throttle and have the rotation. Now, a lot of people say if you increase the wheel rates on the back, you get oversteer, but in this situation, we have a lot of force. We don't have oversteer because the car is pulling the car down, even though we have stiffer wheel rates on the back. Then now we are braking, and this slow corner is just feeling balanced. Now don't look at the lap time, because I didn't really focus on lap time. I just wanted to explain balance. But if I start pushing this car setup, bruh, I can get into some juicy lap times, but it can also be crazy consistent. So to summarize, you got the max wing settings on step 1. On step 2, you did put the rake of the car, the outside box, base balance of the aerodynamics. Then step 3, you got into the dynamic ranges of your setup. And then step 4, different dynamic situations on fast and mid-speed corner situations. Now something happened to your setup. You were making changes, also complementing the mechanical part of your setup. And to give you this final tip, have a little bit of ranges, because that will complement the mechanical grip. If you take the ranges too small, you lose mechanical grip. If you make bump stop ranges, suspension travel too big, you get a lot of dynamic rake, which makes the car pretty hard to handle. Now, there is a lot of stuff in this model still that I kind of figured out already, but there's a lot more to it. So let me know in the comments if you want to see something added to this, because this was the aero approach of the model, but there's also going to be a mechanical approach to this model, and if you can understand both, you will have a hybrid approach. But you cannot understand the hybrid approach if I don't explain the mechanical approach. Before we get into that video, that one I will put up right here, but what is also vital to understand about this particular model is the engine placement. So if I finish the mechanical video, then in the meanwhile, the engine placement video is going to be here for you to watch, and that will also be complementary to this video as well. So thanks for watching.